I welcome everyone who is here tonight. I welcome people that are back from South America, people that have been hiding away from attending church, maybe because of COVID, and anyone who is attending and listening to us on Facebook. Last year we studied the book of Nehemiah, and we learned 4 things. If you remember with me, first thing, who is God? Number 2, what did God do for his people, the human being? Who is the human being? Who is man? And how did man respond to God's dealing? Today we will start a new study series titled Faith and Turning Back from Faith. Now, there is a verse in Hebrews 10:38 that says, "Now the righteous or the just shall live by faith. But if anyone draws back, my soul has no pleasure in him." This verse is found in Hebrews 10, and if you look at Hebrews 11, we read about the heroes of faith. And here we see in chapter 10 a warning that there is danger from turning away from faith. This is taken from Habakkuk. Habakkuk was a prophet before the exile. Habakkuk was talking with God, and he was very upset because he felt God is not responding to him. He was complaining and talking to God that there is chaos everywhere and sin was everywhere. And the book of Habakkuk tells us, Habakkuk said, "I will stand at my watch and station myself on the ramparts." And the Lord replied, and he told him, "I will discipline my people. I will send them into exile." And we find the Lord answers saying, "See, he is puffed up. His desires are not upright," talking about the people of Israel. "But the righteous will live by faith." And that is where Hebrews gets that verse. When you see a verse in the Old Testament and it's repeated 3 times or more in the New Testament, you need to pay attention to that verse. And we find the Apostle Paul using that verse to teach people that we are saved by grace. And we see it in Galatians 3, because he addresses people that were faithful and had the faith, but then turned away from faith. And he started teaching people how to stay steadfast in their faith. So the first time the Apostle Paul talks about faith is in Romans 1, and he quotes that verse, and he talks about who is righteous and how does a person becomes righteous. The second time in Galatians 3, how to live the life of righteousness and not to stray away from that. The righteous shall live by faith, but if anyone draws back, my soul has no pleasure in him. We find out that Martin Luther used that verse, and that's how he came up with the 5 principles, and that's what he called the sola. Only those 5 principles: the faith, only faith and not works. Number 2, Jesus only and no one else. Number 3, grace only, nothing else. 4, the Bible only and no other book. Number 5, glory is to God only and no one else. These were the principles of the Reform. Now, there is a good program called the Bible Project. And what the Bible Project does, it does a recap of the books of the Bible. And when some people find that it is sometimes difficult to follow a book in the Bible, especially in the Old Testament, the Bible Project is very good to watch. And I printed papers for everyone here to look at, but I need you to follow the video with me.
The letter to the Hebrews. The author of this letter is anonymous, and people have wondered for a long time whether Paul wrote it or maybe one of his co-workers like Barnabas or Apollos, but really we just don't know. In chapter 2, we discover that the author had a first-hand relationship with the disciples who were themselves around Jesus, so we know that this letter is anchored in the teaching of the apostles. We also don't know who the audience of this letter was or even where they lived. The author knows them really well, and he assumes that they have a thorough knowledge of the Old Testament scriptures, especially the storyline of the first 5 books of the Bible, the Torah, about how Abraham's family became the nation of Israel, about how Moses led them out of slavery in Egypt to Mount Sinai, where they received the Torah and they made a covenant with God, where they built the tabernacle, where the priests offered sacrifices, and also about how they wandered through the wilderness on their way to the Promised Land. The author just expects that the readers know all of the details about these stories, and so most likely the audience is made up of Jewish Christians. That's where the name of the letter comes from. We also have clues from chapter 10 that this church community was facing persecution and even imprisonment because of their association with Jesus. Some in the community were walking away from Jesus and abandoning the faith altogether. And this explains the purpose and the structure of this letter. First, there's a short introduction, which is followed by 4 sections where the author compares and contrasts Jesus with key people and events from Israel's history. Jesus is first compared with angels in the Torah, second with Moses and the Promised Land, third with priests and Melchizedek, and lastly with the sacrifices and the covenant. And the author has 2 main goals in all of these contrasts. The first goal is to elevate Jesus as superior to anyone or anything else, showing that Jesus is worthy of all their trust and devotion. But his second goal is this: it's to challenge the readers to remain faithful to Jesus despite persecution. So in every section, he includes a strong warning not to abandon Jesus. So let's dive in now and see how this all unfolds. The elevation of Jesus begins in the opening sentence of the introduction. In the past, God spoke to our ancestors in many different ways, but in these last days, he has spoken to us in his Son. So the author's saying that Jesus is superior to all of the previous ways that God has revealed himself to Israel. He then makes this astounding claim that Jesus is the radiance of God's glory and the exact imprint of God's nature. These metaphors are making the closest possible identification between Jesus and God. So Jesus is what the rays of light are to the sun, or Jesus is what the wax impression is to the signet ring. For this author, there is no God apart from Jesus. Jesus is God become human as the Son. And it's this elevated view of Jesus that's then explored throughout the rest of the letter. In the first section, the author compares Jesus with angels, which might strike you as kind of odd, like why angels? In Jewish tradition, it was taught, based on Deuteronomy chapter 33, verse 2, that the Torah and the words of God were delivered to Moses at Mount Sinai by angels. And so by saying that Jesus is superior to angels, the author is claiming that Jesus and his message of good news are superior to all previous messengers of God's word. And so the first warning flows from this very point. If Israel was called to pay attention to the Torah that was delivered by angels, how much more should we pay attention to the message that was announced by the Son of God? And not only that, given Jesus' status high above the angels, how remarkable is it that he gave up that high status to become human, to suffer, and to die? In Jesus, we see God's greatest glory and God's great humility as Jesus sympathetically joined himself to humanity's tragic fate. In chapters 3 and 4, the author moves on to argue that Jesus is superior to Moses, who led the people of Israel through the wilderness and built the tabernacle. Jesus is also the leader of God's people, but in him we see not the builder of just a tent, but of all creation. Then the author retells the story of how the Israelites rebelled against Moses in the wilderness, and they lost their chance to enter into the rest that God offered them in the promised land. And so here comes the second warning. If Jesus is greater than Moses, how much higher are the stakes if we rebel against him? We also are in a wilderness-like environment where we have to trust God for the future rest in God's new creation. So let's make sure that we don't rebel like Israel did in the wilderness and lose out on God's gracious offer to enter his new creation. In chapters 5 through 7, the author then compares Jesus with Israel's priests that come from the line of Aaron. Their role was to represent Israel before God and to offer sacrifices that atoned for or covered over the sins of the people. But, he points out, the priests were themselves morally flawed people, and so they constantly had to offer sacrifices for their own sins as well as for everybody else's. Something more was needed. And so he then argues that Jesus was that something more. He's the ultimate priest. But Jesus did not come from the line of Aaron. Rather, Jesus was a priest in the order of Melchizedek, that mysterious priest king from ancient Jerusalem, and he appears in the stories about Abraham. We also find in Psalm 110 that the Messianic king from the line of David will be a priest in the order of Melchizedek. So the author's whole point is this. Jesus is the ultimate priest king. He's morally flawless, he's eternally available for his people, and so he's superior to any other mediator between God and humans. And thus comes his warning in this section. To reject Jesus is to reject one's best and only chance to be fully reconciled to God, so don't do that. Which transitions us into the last comparison in chapters 8 through 10. The author shows how Jesus' death on the cross was the ultimate sacrifice, superior to all the animal sacrifices offered in the temple. Those sacrifices had to be offered constantly, both daily, but also yearly on the Day of Atonement. Jesus offered his life once and for all, and it was sufficient to cover the sins of the whole world. And so the author warns the audience from walking away from Jesus. It's like turning your back on a gracious offer of God's forgiveness. Why would you do that? Jesus' sacrifice is permanent, he says, and it's the foundation for the new covenant spoken of in the prophets, where all sins are forgiven. So now that the author has elevated Jesus through all of these contrasts, this final section is one big challenge to follow Jesus. So think big picture. In Jesus, they have found God's very word. In Jesus, they have hope for the new creation. Jesus is their eternal priest. He's the perfect sacrifice. And so now they should follow all the great models of faith found throughout the story of the scriptures, and they should remain faithful to Jesus, trusting that despite whatever hardship and persecution, God will not abandon his people. That's the basic flow of thought throughout the letter, which the author calls right here at the very end a brief word of exhortation. Here's a couple of extra tips for reading this letter. Whenever the author quotes from the Old Testament scriptures, which is like every other sentence, stop and go look up the reference and read that quotation in its original context. And sometimes you'll be puzzled, but more often you'll see all kinds of extra cool connections that you would never notice otherwise. It's totally worth the effort. You should also just know that these warning passages, they're going to make you uncomfortable, and that's kind of the point. They're not there to make you afraid. They're there to show you that rejecting Jesus is foolish because he's so awesome. These warnings all serve the larger purpose of the letter, to show that Jesus is the ultimate revelation of God's love and mercy. And that's what the letter of the Hebrews is all about.
I hope that you were able to follow the video and to see what the letter of Hebrews talks about. Hebrews is a recap and a review of the Old Testament. And you see how it captures all the Old Testament books and puts it into Jesus. Hebrews has about 100 quotes of the Old Testament. And if you take all the quotes out, you will find very few words in between. I want you to see the very clear line between the Old Testament and the New Testament. It is one discipline to tell you that it is all about Jesus. You will find that it's Jesus and only Jesus. And Jesus was not human only, he was God appearing in the flesh. The Old Testament had symbols and had quotes and prophecies. All was a foreshadowing of Jesus coming. And you will see in Hebrews that there is teaching and warning. Teaching and warning. And Jesus was all throughout the Old Testament. And in the New Testament, he was the God incarnate. God in the flesh. So it's teaching us how all the messages in the Old Testament was about Jesus, and it also gives us a warning not to turn back from faith. It is encouraging us to be steadfast, holding on to the faith, continuing strong, and forging ahead, warning us from shrinking back or drawing back. The Old Testament is a clear example of what happens when we turn away from faith, a warning on how to live a life of faith without turning back, because turning back has a price and a consequence. It's not written for the heathens or someone who does not know Christ. This is for Christians who know Christ. And when we look at Hebrews 1:1, the first word is God. God, who at various times and in various ways spoke in the time past to the fathers by the prophets, has in these last days spoken to us by his Son. You will see how God spoke in various ways through the prophets. in various ways, at various times, he spoke to the fathers. Now, Hebrews does not have introductions. It doesn't say from the Apostle Paul to the people living in such and such a place, like the Corinthians, or it just immediately, straightforward talks about God and what God has done, because the topic is very important. It could not wait. So verse 1 in Hebrews 1 starts with God. God. And sometimes people are uncomfortable because they say, well, maybe I don't believe in God. And you open Hebrews 1 and you find it says God. And I'm going to talk to you about 3 truths. First truth, the Bible, this book that we believe in, does not investigate the existence of God. The Bible presents God as a true matter of fact, true and proven. And the problem is not whether he exists or not. The problem is whether you or people accept him or not. It is not out to prove God. No introduction. The declaration that God exists, it doesn't care about offending someone who doesn't believe in God. So don't get into fruitless arguments. And if you read in Genesis 1:1, the Bible says, in the beginning, God created. So creation was not a result of evolution. It had nothing to do with Darwin. Genesis 1:1 states God. Again, the Bible is not out to prove the existence of God. The Bible takes God as truth. At the beginning, God is there. And it's not the problem of the Bible if you believe in creation or not. I want you to understand that first truth. It's very important. For people who say there is no God and no creation, this is not the problem of the Bible. Resolve the issue yourself and try to understand what the Bible says and believe what it says. In Psalm 14 and 53, it says, who denies God has a problem. Foolishness. It says the foolish is the one who says there is no God. All have turned aside. They have together become corrupt. There is no one who does good, not even one. And it also says the wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all the godless and wickedness of man, who suppresses the truth by their wickedness. In Romans 1:18. Since what may be known about God is plain to them, because God has made it plain to them, and God is clearly seen. So the first truth, God exists, and it is not something that the Bible is out to prove. The problem is humans' refusal and refusal to accept the truth that God exists. Point number 2, God spoke. God speaks in various ways. And he spoke at various times. So God speaks, he always did. Again, Hebrews 1:1, God who at various times and in various ways spoke in time past to our fathers. So God always spoke. And it summarizes the Old Testament that God spoke to us throughout times about Jesus. And he never changed what he was talking about. The message never changed, even though it was various times, various ways. Is that Jesus is Lord. Jesus was there from the very beginning. In Genesis, it says, God spoke. God said. God said, and there was no human being. So what does it mean that God said? That word that came out of God's mouth is Jesus. In the Old Testament, it says no one has seen God. So then, who is God speaking through? He spoke through Jesus, his son. No one could see God. And everything that we heard from the Father was through his son. Because his son created. He is the Word. And when God spoke in the past, he spoke through Jesus. And we look at 2 examples. Abraham. In John 8:58, Jesus says, I tell you the truth, before Abraham was born, I am. And the people of Israel were so angry, they were about to stone him. Abraham, how can Jesus know Abraham? Because Jesus did see Abraham at the Mount of Moriah. He was the one who met with Abraham when Abraham was offering his son Isaac as a sacrifice. This is the first example. The second example of Jesus in the Old Testament, we see in John 12:38. When it's quoting from Isaiah 6, God was speaking, and the Lord speaks, and Isaiah says, I heard the voice of the Lord saying, yes, the Lord speaks, God speaks. He has always spoken to us, and he still does. Isaiah says, I heard the voice of the Lord saying, whom shall I send? And who will go for us? And I said, here I am, send me. He said, go and tell these people. Be ever hearing, but never understanding. be ever seeing but never perceiving. This is the same Jesus. In the Old Testament, the God incarnate, Jesus in the New Testament. And in Hebrews 1, it says, God, who at various times, in various ways, spoke in the past to the fathers by the prophets, has in these last days spoken to us. Now, how did he speak to us? By his Son. And some people say, oh, that's for the people back then. No, he's talking about us now. He did not speak to us through dreams or visions or parables. He spoke to us by his Son. These are the last days. The last days is an expression that is used by Peter and by the writer of Hebrews, telling us that these are the days we are living in. That expression of the last days talks about the days from after Jesus rose from the dead and conquered death until his second coming. The last days are the same expression that is used at the Pentecost. All this span of time from Jesus' resurrection until his second coming is the last days. The verse says, spoke to us. In these last days, spoke to us by his Son. And it does not say that he spoke to us through his Son, like his Son said the words. No, he spoke to us by his Son, because his Son is the actual message. And in Hebrews 4, we understand that Jesus is our salvation. The Son, who is God incarnate, God in the flesh. And Jesus says, I am the way. No one comes to the Father except through me. So when Jesus says, I am the way, and no one comes to the Father except through me, don't go open that door again. It is only one way. Jesus closed that door. He said, I am the only way. Don't go try and explain and soften things and find another door. And we see that Jesus was beaten, was humiliated in the flesh. But he was not a person only in the flesh, but he is God in the flesh. Colossians 2:9 says, in him dwells all the fullness of the Godhead bodily. And this is the point, the main point that Hebrews takes, the writer of Hebrews takes for the whole book of Hebrews. And after that, in Hebrews 1, after Hebrews 1:1, it talks about who Jesus, who made the world, who being the brightness of his glory and an express image of his person, but we're gonna get to that at a later time, not now. Right now, you need to understand that your faith is important, and turning away has consequences. In the Old Testament, the turning away had very severe punishment. But I tell you, these days, turning back or turning away from your faith has deadly consequences. When the Bible says in Psalm 2:12, kiss the Son, it does not mean give him a kiss on the cheek. It means obey him, worship him, follow him. Judas kissed Jesus, and that's how he betrayed him. So it's not literal to kiss the Son. Kiss the Son means to hold fast to your faith, obey him, follow him, worship him. Now we look at Deuteronomy 32:1. God says, listen, you heavens, and I will speak. Hear, you earth, the words of my mouth. When God speaks, you listen. And listening means obedience. And the problem Hebrews is looking at and addressing are people that listened but never obeyed. And that's why Hebrews tells us, be warned. Learn the lesson from the Old Testament and the people that left their faith, and don't repeat it. We get a severe warning. Until we meet the next time and discuss who is the Son and how he appeared in the flesh and how he calls us to pay attention and not to fall in the same mistake that people in the Old Testament fell into. The Bible does not prove the existence of God. You know there is a sun and moon. If I tell someone, look, here is the sun, here is the moon, and someone says, no, I don't believe it, you think something is wrong with his head because it's right there. The sun and the moon is right there. God speaks today the same as when he spoke before. And in Hebrews 1:1, God speaks. And in Hebrews 2, we see the Son speaks. And in Hebrews 3, we see the Holy Spirit speaks. And it tells us, do not harden your hearts. Because in the Old Testament, we see people that were destroyed in the wilderness. And we need to heed that advice. Today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts. Jesus is the revelation of God. Jesus is God in the flesh. He is the Most High. He is the final and the clearest revelation of God. And we see Jesus in John 14:8 talking to Philip and saying, anyone who has seen me has seen the Father. So there is no need to ask to see God, because if you have seen Jesus, you have seen the Father. And he is the only Son of God, the exact image of God. And Jesus, who being in the very nature of God, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, but made himself nothing, taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness, and being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on the cross. In 1 Timothy 4:1, the Spirit clearly says that in later times, some will abandon the faith and will follow deceiving spirits and things taught by demons. Now, the righteous shall live by faith. But if anyone draws back, my soul has no pleasure in him. Be careful not to follow deceiving spirits and things taught by demons, because this is a warning. In later times, these are going to be all around us. Do not be led astray. Do not follow deception and delusion. Now, says Hebrews 10, the just shall live by faith. When? Now. Be very careful and don't be deceived. I encourage you to read the book of Hebrews and to remember it encourages us to continue in faith. Number 2, it cautions us and warns us from turning back or drawing back from faith. And trust me, I talk to people about their faith and they say, what are you talking about? We're fine. We are okay. We have no problems. I tell you, no one can ever deny God and have any security. The third thing is that Hebrews quotes the Old Testament, and pay attention to all the quotes that's in there. Maybe get a concordance Bible or an applied Bible and start reading and finding how the New Testament is a continuation of the Old Testament and how Hebrews has quoted the Old Testament many, many times. I will stop here at the verse we started with. Now, the just or the righteous shall live by faith. And next time, we're going to talk about how to be righteous and how we can have righteousness through faith, and how righteousness only comes through Jesus. I encourage you to take time alone and check with yourself. Check what you believe in. Some people shy away from that question. But you need to check and search your heart. Who is Jesus exactly? And some people say, oh, Jesus is everyone. He's everything. No, you need to specifically ask yourself, who is Jesus to you? Is he really God in the flesh? I will pray with you. And I encourage you during these days and the challenges we face daily to put your eyes on Jesus and the words in Hebrews and take it personally, as if Hebrews is talking to you personally. That God is speaking to you by his Son. Because Jesus says, my words are spirit. So the words of the Holy Spirit, the words of the Bible are spirit. Let's pray. God, we are living through many challenges these days. And there are many wrong teachings and many teachings that are deceptive. And instead of following or trying to find out which teachings we should follow and which teacher we should follow, help us read your Bible, your word to ourselves. We want to leave the media and Facebook and following others and read your words, God, to ourselves. And you teach us through your Holy Spirit. Talk to me, because I know that you have spoken in the past and you still speak. And you are speaking to me today. The Apostle Paul did say that faith comes by hearing, and hearing the word of God. And the Bible tells us, if we confess with our mouth that Jesus is Lord, that we receive Jesus in our heart and become justified in Christ. Jesus came in the flesh and he declared to us the love of God the Father, and he told us what we have in him. I ask you, God, don't allow anyone to leave tonight without giving their heart to you and their life to you completely. Through the challenges of this world, the just shall live by faith. And faith is not something that you do once and forget about it. Faith is something practiced every day, that Jesus lives in me. I live the life of faith, which is Christ in me. That I have been crucified to this world, and now Jesus lives in me. Amen.